Will you please have a few words I'm going to make all nonsense. I'm going to cut some time off, I apologize for the delay. I got sidetracked.
It's all my fault.
It was about 300 people upstairs with questions. Can you all hear me? I don't have a mic. This is only a pickup for the recording equipment. So if you can't hear, let me know. We're glad everybody could come out today.
Right away, turn the fan off, anybody?
The air conditioner's drowning everything out.
Check with William about the air conditioner. I'm surprised that there's so many here, which is a great thing. And I welcome everybody for making the effort to come. I fell down on the job this past month. I didn't send a letter out to everybody warning them. We let some know by phone. If you got word from other people, But here we are. So it's good that everybody remembers what April 19 is about. For those of you that have never been here before, like I said, we welcome you. If you're new to Waco, if you got time, look around. The government's always tried to paint our church group as a, some crazy cult, that Johnny-come-lately type of situation where we just showed up in the days of David Koresh. What most people don't know is we've been around for almost 100 years. Not me, but the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists started in Los Angeles in 1929. And the leader of that, what became the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist, was a Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath school teacher. And in the spring of 1929, their lesson books for the quarter of that year, was on the book of Isaiah. And he was teaching a particular class out in Los Angeles. And the word ran around the church out there that this guy's got something to say, something different, something interesting, something exciting. So people started leaving all the other classes and joining his class. It got so crowded that they had to go rent a hall somewhere to continue to cope with everybody. As a result of that, Seventh-day Adventist, I'm cutting the story somewhat short, Seventh-day Adventist Church excommunicated all of these church members that were studying the Bible with somebody that they didn't condone, somebody they didn't approve of. And so in 1935, Victor Houteff and a group of people from LA moved to Waco. And they built from the ground up, and that, I mean that literally, they built it out of local rock over on what is now the edge of Lake Waco. If some of you know Waco at all, you know Valley Mills is a major road with all the restaurants and so forth. At the end of that, the road dips down, becomes Lakeshore Drive. If you're driving out there and look at the street signs, the names on the streets, the Davidians, quite a number of the streets were named after Davidians. A number of years ago, I went to Baylor with a guy that was writing a book. His name was Joe Roberts. He wanted to go over and look at pictures and so forth for his book, and they allowed him. Thank you. They allowed him access to the collection. While he's doing that, I got to talking to the curator of this Texas collection. And I said, you know, I like history. I read a lot of history. I said, I'm kind of curious. I never find any books that mentions the Davidians and Waco going all the way back to the beginning. And I don't know whether he got out of bed on the wrong side that day or what, but he had an attitude. He said, well, why should it? Why should Waco, the Davidians be mentioned in the history of Waco? I says, we've been here a long time. It's prime real estate where they used to live over near the lake now. And so, when I first came to Waco in 1966, I'd go downtown, I'd talk to businessmen and different people that we had to do business with, and they would tell me about the old-time Davidians. They didn't say they were a bunch of crazy nuts. They were very respectful of them, up to a point anyway. One business owner told me, he says, I knew Victor Houghton, the leader of the group. He says, and he was a good man. He was an honorable man. He said, if he'd have asked me to loan him $1 million, I'd have done it because I knew I'd get it back. As time went on, Victor Houghton ended up dying in 1955. And his wife took over, and they began making predictions, and, when there'd be a resurrection, when God's judgments would fall on the churches and all that kind of stuff. And they set a date for it. Typical cult stuff, based on so-called prophecy and everything. But Victor Houghton never taught that. This is the ones that survived him. They began setting dates for them getting out of town. They're going to be going to the kingdom, which they believe would be in Jerusalem, be in Israel. And when all that didn't happen, they all got discouraged and left. Took all the church assets with them and vamoosed, They tried to sell the property and succeeded. The old Mount Carmel. They succeeded in selling old Mount Carmel. They had a lawyer, and I said, what do we owe you for being our lawyer throughout this process? He says, you don't have to pay me in money. All I want is the cemetery. So they bulldozed all of the bodies that were buried at the old Mount Carmel, stuck them over on the south side of town, or the east side of town, where all the cemeteries are. They're all lined up on the other side of LaSalle. You know, buried them, and there's a road that goes around the edge of the cemetery, runs right over some of their graves. We've had a lot of history here, but it's not always been appreciated or liked by the people that run Waco. Now, we used to always get along great with our neighbors. We got along great with business people that we dealt with. But, you know, people in City Hall and that are a little resentful. Maybe people at Baylor are a little resentful sometimes. Because in Waco, if you're not Catholic or Baptist, you're a heretic, pretty much. You know, it's just the way they are. And yet, Waco is a magnet for religions. We went yesterday to a place called Homestead Heritage. You know, it's a religious community becoming more and more famous year to year. They got stores, they got restaurants, they got manufacturing, they got, you know, they farm the old-fashioned way like Mennonites and the... So, they're a big thing in Waco. People don't like them, but they go there because it's something to do, you know. Every year they have an open house where the public's invited. They're packed to the gills. You can barely get a parking spot. They go out there to listen to the music, see the people milking cows and, you know, barn raising or whatever. They spend several days putting this show on, and people flock there. But a few years back, I worked at a health food store, and my boss died, and his wife decided to get rid of it, close it down. And all our customers were coming to me saying, well, where are we going to get our health foods? Where are we going to get good stuff, you know? And I said, well, Homestead Heritage has, you know, all kinds of flour and bread and cheese and candles, and they make all that stuff. Oh, we wouldn't go out there. They're a cult. Well, you could go down to Lott, which is just a few miles south of here, where all the Mennonites and the Amish and that are. Nobody wanted to go down and support them. The label cult is used against anybody that's different, anybody that you might say is new. It's considered a derogatory word by the ones that are using it. It's a put down. I just shrug it off. I say, it's just short for culture. We've got it and you don't. So, the years go by, and David's group that started at New Mount Carmel on the east side of town back in 1983, we moved off for a while because of some contention over the property. We went to East Texas. Somebody else got on the property and was running it. The individual that was there called up David one time. We were up in East Texas. Called him up. He says, I've just dug a body up out of the cemetery. I'm challenging you to see if you can resurrect this person. Because if you can resurrect her, I'll give up all that I'm doing and join you. But if I can do it, then you all ought to come down here and accept me. David went to the sheriff's department here in town. He says, isn't it a crime to dig up a cemetery or dig up a body? He says, yep. He says, well, we're hearing rumors, you know. Certain person out at Mount Carmel is making these claims that he can resurrect this person. You might want to look into it. Well, we don't want to go all the way out there just on a rumor. We need some evidence. If you can show us something to back up your story, maybe we'll deal with it. So David sent a young guy out to Mount Carmel who went into the church with a camera and took pictures of a coffin on a couple of sawhorses up the front of the chapel, which used to be up near the front gate. Bring it back. David takes it down to the sheriff's department. Says, there you go, coffin, got an Israeli flag draped on it. This is what we're talking about. Sheriff's people say, yep, looks like a coffin. Yep, looks like it's been dug up. It's got mud or rust or whatever. But how do we know there's anything in it? We need more proof. I'm thinking, this is what the police are supposed to do. Check it out. And so, this is what they're telling David. Oh, here we go again, you know. So he's leaving the sheriff's department. And as he's about to go out the door, the guy says, you need to be careful, you know. The guy out there is crazy. He has guns. He says, if I was you, I'd get me some protection, which David did. Went down and bought a couple of rifles, a couple of shotguns maybe. And he goes out, he gets his father-in-law to drive him in a van with 8 guys. And his father-in-law pulls up in the middle of the night outside the front gate, lets them all get out, and drives off and leaves them. So these guys go into the ditch, you know, out on the outside of the fence. Okay, we're here to get pictures of whatever's in the coffin. So David sends a guy in with a camera and says, you got to get pictures of the inside, not just the box. After a while, this guy comes back and says, guess what? The coffin's not there. It's been moved. So everybody's going like, what do we do now? So they decide to walk around the perimeter of the property, not go on the property, but go all the way around. And way up in the back corner of the property was our dairy barn. They decided to stay in the dairy barn until daylight, when they would go looking for the coffin. If you all think this story is a bit far-fetched, you can ask Paul. He was there. I wasn't. I was in Hawaii.
Lucky you.
I was one of the last ones left in Hawaii when we came back. So they go, in the morning, they go down from house to house. They're looking to see if it's been put in a house or in a shed or whatever. Some of the houses had people living in them. And David told them that check the house. If it's empty, go in and see if there's any coffin in there. If there's people in it, say, look, we don't want any trouble. You know, we suggest you either leave the property or stay inside, and you know, we don't want anybody to get hurt. Well, one guy made like he was leaving, I guess, and he drove all the way from the back of the property up to the house where George Roden was staying, who was the guy supposedly running the place. He said there's some guys walking down from the back. Some of them have got guns. George grabs an Uzi submachine gun, runs outside, and the first people he sees coming around the corner, he starts shooting at them. David said, I realized some of my people were going to get hurt. So he told them to all hunker down, and he came out, basically faced George, and when George saw him, he ran behind a tree. And so David kept shooting at the tree, just to keep, you know, make him keep his head down so nobody would get hurt. That's the lead up to the story that David's people all raided Mount Carmel, tried to kill George and take over the property. Before it was over, they'd all been arrested, taken to jail. George Roden wasn't arrested because he lived there, but all the ones that went with David were arrested. How many weeks were you in jail? Oh, you got out a little early, but
Maybe 2 months.
2 months in jail. I remember after the fire, when we all ended up in jail, the sheriff's department told me, don't think we're going to give you special treatment like we did the last time you guys were here. What special treatment? Extra ration of peanut butter. No peanut butter this time. If you won't eat whatever we put in the slop bucket for you, then, you know, too bad. If you don't like that, you can pay through the nose, through the commissary, and buy some cookies or something. The sheriff's department here in town were pretty friendly towards David and the people that lived out at Mount Carmel. They had 2 sheriffs that regularly patrolled the back roads. You know, it's part of their route that they go through every day or every week or whatever. We had people that would come out and fish in our lakes. We had people come out and deal for car parts from David. You know, got along pretty good. We got along with our neighbors. Neighbor across the road, bring his kids over, watch movies, eat with us, listen to a Bible study. No problem. Somebody tried to stir up trouble, and usually you find that's with a disgruntled member, somebody that's left. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's a religion or just a job. Somebody leaves, their excuse that they tell themselves as to why they left was because the boss was mean or they weren't getting paid enough, or, you know, they got a big long story as to why they had to leave the job or leave that church or got thrown out of that church, whatever. They try to make the story in their favor, you might say. There was a guy that had been with David for quite a while. Came from, well, we met him in California, but he was from Hawaii. And at some point, he made up his mind he was leaving. He had recently got married to a girl from Australia, so he wanted to go to Australia. And he got over there and got it in his mind that he was going to break this cult. He'd expose them. He'd tell all these horrifying stories about what went on and what David did or what David said or some of the other people. If you ever get a chance to meet this guy, take a good look. The guy is almost blind. I've seen him ride a bicycle out in California where he was hanging over the handlebars trying to find the white line on the road so he could, pedal his bicycle in broad daylight. He was legally blind. He could see a little bit, but not much. And yet he's testifying about all the things he saw. Oh, they've got guns. We maybe had 2 guns at the time that he was a member of this group. Because when we came back from East Texas in 1987, we got all kinds of threats. People were going to come out and shoot us up. People were upset that we'd interrupted their illegal activities out there at the property. George was renting houses to ex-convicts, people he'd met in jail. They would do it. Selling dope, making dope, selling pornography, all kinds of stuff. Now the sheriff's department knew very well who these people were. They didn't do anything about it, so we stood guard for quite a while at night in case somebody wanted to sneak in and do some shooting or whatever. But on the strength of that story, that we had guns, on the strength that we had a meth lab out there, which was untrue, the ATF put together a case that they were going to raid us, stop this illicit trafficking of methamphetamines. And they were just as deficient, the ATF were just as deficient in their putting the case together as the Sheriff's Department had been years before in regards to the coffin. They didn't do their homework. They didn't do any research. They just decided we put all the onus on David to prove his point. Well, in this situation about the guns, they never came and asked David, could they see his guns? They went to the gun dealer, one of the gun dealers that David had some business with, wanted to start asking a lot of questions about where the guns were coming from and what he was getting and what he was doing with them and all of that. Two of the agents went to that gun dealer, and while they're fussing around and wanting to look through all his paperwork and all of that, the guy calls David up on the phone. So there's a couple of agents here asking about the guns you're buying. Asking me a lot of questions. He says, tell them to come on out. We'll show them what we got. They just about freaked out when the gun dealer told them that David had invited them to come look. Oh no, they didn't want to do that. That might put you in harm's way. Now the sheriffs used to come and visit all the time. We had people from Child, what do you call it? Child Protective Agency from downtown Waco came out with a deputy one day, and we gave them the guided tour. They were allowed to speak to the kids, they were allowed to speak to the parents, and everything was hunky-dory. There was no problem. They found nothing to, get excited about or to file charges against or make demands about. But not the ATF. The ATF wouldn't come out. They wouldn't approach David personally. So what they did was they went to a brand new federal judge here in Waco. I don't know whether it was his first day or his first week on the job or what, but they wanted him to sign some warrants. They got a search warrant for the building and an arrest warrant for David Koresh. And on the strength of that, February 28, 1993, you have this army, 3 helicopters, 2 cattle trailers full of agents, about 75 or more agents attack the property, come in guns blazing. They didn't knock on the door and say, "Please, sir, can we come in? We've got an arrest warrant or we got a search warrant." I was telling some people upstairs just a while ago, the first cattle trailer that pulled up to the north end of the building, which is on the left if you're looking at the pictures. And the people jumping out of it are running around, going around the back of the building. But there were 3 that jumped out of one particular, out of the cattle trailer. And I don't know where they were supposed to run to, but about the time they got out of the trailer, they heard shots. They were asked during our trial, "Where did you hear the shooting coming from?" "Or the front door area." "Well, what did you think when you heard shots being fired?" "Oh, we thought it was our guys taking care of their dogs," which they were shooting our dogs. Dogs weren't hurting them, but they didn't like them having their mouth open or barking or whatever. Now their story was that the minute they turned in at their driveway, 500 or more yards up, closer to the road out the front, that we start shooting at them right then. I've talked to people, news people, sheriff's deputies. I've talked to several different people that were there that day. I says, "Were you fired on the minute you made like you were going to go in the gate?" They said no. The news reporter told me, he says, "All us news people were in the ditch outside, supposed to cover this big raid, this big newsworthy story. They'd been tipped off to be there, take pictures, make it look good." He said, "We were all in the ditch." And he said, shots were coming, by the time it got going, shots were coming in both directions, from the houses across the road and from the big building. But it was not an ambush. They were all the way down the front door, shooting the dogs and shooting from the helicopters. They said, "Oh, somebody tipped us off. It was that stupid guy from the TV station that told David Jones that he was looking for Mount Carmel and asked directions, you know. He tipped them off, and that they were all waiting for us when we got out there. You know that the helicopters were out there a half hour before the trucks ever came, flying in circles around us as a diversion, take our mind off what was going to be happening when they drove in, distract us so that we're looking at the back, you know, wondering why they're shooting the tower up and why they're shooting through the roof of the building. People say over and over, why didn't you all just, when you heard they were coming, just go out and sit on the lawn, you know, and nobody would have got hurt? Sounds logical, you know, sounds like a fair question. Unless you've had your eye from a historical standpoint on how law enforcement operates in this country and has done for hundreds of years. A lot of times they shoot first and ask questions later, or don't ask at all because you're dead and you can't answer them. We got things in the, you know, stories on the news every day of black people being shot and they're unarmed. Kids with a toy. People say, why didn't you just do what they said? I said, to be quite honest, we didn't trust them. We had an old lady with bad feet or bad ankles. David told us she needed to go out. This is during the siege. He says, you need medical attention. They're willing to take you to a doctor or take you to the hospital. She was crying, I don't want to go, I want to stay. But he finally prevailed and said, you need to go out. And by the time she actually went out the front door, the tank was somewhere in the vicinity and they're screaming at her, get down on the ground. This woman's in her 80s. Get down on the ground, take your coat off, start stripping sort of thing. You ask the people inside, well, don't you respect law enforcement? Sure, we need law enforcement. I'm not an enemy of law enforcement. I told somebody the other day, I says, not once can I remember any of the survivors or any of the people that died in it ever wanting revenge for what was going on. We did try to sue the government, but weren't allowed to get to first base with it. Not because we wanted to get rich off of them, but, since we weren't allowed to put a defense case on during our criminal trial, we had a civil trial, hoping that the truth would come out, and the judge wouldn't allow it. Made a ruling before it ever started. You can't talk about anything but February 28th and April 19th. You can't say a word about anything that happened in between, or what led up to it, or what's been said and done afterwards. So we knew right off the bat. Of course, we had the same judge that had been prejudiced in the criminal trial, so we didn't get a fair shake. The survivors got no you know, no help from the government. Even the little so-called innocent kids. The government did not believe you were all innocent. We've got some survivors that were children 26 years ago in the room. The government did not believe you were innocent children. In their mind, your parents were snakes, and big snakes have little snakes, and you'll grow up to be big snakes, so, you know, kill them all and let God sort them out in the judgment or whatever. That's the attitude. Now, I'm not putting individual officers down. I'm not putting down even the institutions. But somebody makes those kind of decisions when they go in and smash your door in, drag you off, humiliate you, you know, all that kind of stuff. I said to my lawyer at the end of the trial, we had a trial that went on for 7.5 weeks, I think it was, after we'd been in jail for almost a year. I said, is there any way of getting paid for losing a year's wages? No. They tell you, you know, America's different to Europe. France, you're guilty until proven innocent. It's supposed to be the other way around here. You're innocent until proven guilty. But you're treated like you're guilty. When they first put me in jail down here in McLennan County, I said, would you mind if I mowed the lawn around the jail? You can't mow the lawn. I says, why not? They said, federal prisoners cannot be trustees. You can't walk around the halls and cut hair like some of them do. You know, you can't serve the food. You can't do anything. You're locked up. You're a federal prisoner. You couldn't go anywhere without a guard, without being chained up. They believe you're guilty. You're just a bunch of trouble, you know. If any of you had met people like Graham Craddock, some guy called Clive Doyle, and a few others, we were just a pushover. You know, we weren't thugs, we weren't terrorists. Unfortunately for us, when we were shipped down to San Antonio for the trial, the news went ahead that we were a terrorist organization. They called us El Fatah, all because of Paul. Paul Fatah was his name. So they, you know, messed with that a little bit, and we were El Fatah, and they were scared of us for a while until they found out how nice we were. We had prisoners in jail with us that got beat up by other people in the jail and were taken out of the area we were in and sent to another area that begged to be put back in with us because they felt safe. So you figure. I could go on all day as long as my voice held up, but I'm going to ask Kathy Wessinger if she could come forward. She wanted to say a few words, and then I'm going to let Paul and David Thibodeau and any of the other survivors that are here, if they want to say something, to come and participate. That way you're not listening to me all the time. Okay. Okay. You want to come up here to the mic? It's not working. It's not a mic. It's a pickup.
I'll project. It's just an announcement. I'm a professor. I'm Catherine Wessinger. I'm a professor over at Loyola University in New Orleans, and I've been engaged in an oral history project with the Branch Davidian survivors for a long time, and I interviewed Sheila and Clive and Bonnie and also Catherine Madison while she was alive. And for Catherine, I produced transcripts, which of course she rewrote, being Catherine. So she rewrote them completely. But then I put them in the Texas collection at Baylor University. But for Clive and Sheila and Bonnie, I edited the transcripts to make autobiographies for them. Matt Whitmer, Clive had so much to say, 31 audio tapes. So Matt Whitmer helped me copy edit those transcripts or correct the transcripts and then edit them to make an autobiography for Clive. Those 3 autobiographies are in their own words. They had the final say-so about what was published, and so it truly is. They truly are their autobiographies. So I can't do that for everyone. It was raised recently that I should be interviewing other people, so that's what I'm undertaking to do. So my oral history project is taking a new phase. I'll be recording interviews with Branch Davidian survivors using my phone, my iPhone. And so I'm interested in interviewing survivors, relatives of survivors, friends of survivors, and also friends of people, of Branch Davidians, way back when, before '93. And so I'll be around today, tomorrow. I'm not sure about Sunday, possibly Sunday, we'll see. But so I'll be recording short statements. And I just want to say that these recorded videos will be uploaded to my YouTube channel. I now have a YouTube channel. And they'll also be uploaded to a Facebook page named Remembering the Branch Davidians. But to give me permission to upload these videos online, I have to ask you to sign a release. And I just want to briefly say that it gives me permission to upload the video to the YouTube channel, to the Facebook page. It gives me permission to put the videos in archives and also to use for educational purposes. It also states that I'm not paying you for the video, okay, for the interview. And lastly, and this is something I felt strongly about because Clive and Sheila, I think especially Clive, they've given interviews for a long time, but frequently what they say gets misrepresented. I've given a few interviews. I've had the same experience last year, so I know what it's like. So on this release, it specifically says that the recorded video is, I'm not making a documentary. It's not for the purpose of a documentary. It's not for the purpose of any news report. And so anybody comes along who's making a documentary or who wants to use it in a news report, they have to get in touch with the person interviewed and ask for permission to use it. And if the person I interviewed is deceased, they need to get permission from their heirs. So it states this is not for a documentary purpose. So I can leave some of the releases here on the table. You can talk to me later if you like, and we can set something up. So thanks.
Put your 2 cents worth in, Paul.
Just 2 cents.
Well, since you don't come every year, maybe you can have 3 cents worth.
You can hang up here with me if you want.
You want me to hold it in?
Yeah. Morning, everyone, if it's still morning. My name's Paul Fata. I was part of the Branch Davidians. I came a little later than Clive. He's been around for a while. He's a dinosaur, but he's in good shape. So my connection to the Davidians, I lived in Hawaii. I had a business there. I was a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I went to a prayer meeting one Friday night, and there was a gentleman that he was talking about there named Mark Bro. He was giving a Bible study, and some of the elders didn't like what he was presenting at the time. So you got to look, it's a church situation. There's probably about maybe 30 people there. Well, they stopped him. They said, hey, you can't talk about this in here, which really bothered me because I was like, this is censorship. He should be able to speak his mind even if he's not right. At least he has a right to say what he wants to say. So they ended the meeting, and at that point, I went to the person that was giving. I said, hey, I apologize for the way they treated you. And I told the people, whoever wants to continue this Bible study, you can come to my house, which I didn't live too far away. So that was how this whole connection for me, ended up. If you remember that. So from there, there was a series of studies. Well, there was a group studying at my house. I was not involved in it. I had 2 roommates. They were more involved than I was. And then eventually I started listening, and I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. It's different. And so you guys know Steve Schneider. He was coming to the meetings. Steve, Judy. Steve was a close friend of mine back in Hawaii. A lot of the people that passed at Mount Carmel were friends of mine in Hawaii prior to the message. So I talked to Steve, and I was like, hey, this is pretty interesting. Where's he getting all this information? And then we confronted Mark, found out that he got it from David. So we bought plane tickets, and we flew from Hawaii to California. And then on it went. So in 1987, I left Hawaii, came to California, and then we ended up in Palestine. And yes, I was part of the group that went in to get pictures of the casket. And we ended up... Clive told the story perfectly. Everything he said was true. We did get arrested, and one thing I remember when they took us into the Sally Port over here in Waco, they said the sheriff, the head one, came in and said, hey, I appreciate that you guys were respectful to my men, but I remember him saying, but you guys cannot do this in America. That's what he told us. But what he didn't tell you was we were acting upon the advice that they gave us, but I think they didn't think we were going to go through with it. So that was in '87. Eventually, we moved on to the property, right? And we started renovating, rebuilding it, and then I think I was there off and on from '87 till '93. The day of the raid was February 28th. I was actually 100 miles away. I was in Austin, Texas at a gun show. Steve Schneider had been with me the couple days before, and for some reason that day, Sunday, I think, was it a Sunday or Saturday? It was a Sunday. I took my son with me that day, and I was in Austin, Texas, and was unaware of what took place. It just came back. The perimeter was closed. I didn't know the reason why. So then I started calling out to the property, and then I called, I think it was Maribel. And she's the one that told me that there was a shootout and people were, injured, killed. I was like in shock. And so I called the sheriff's department, told them who I was. They were like, hey, they were actually apologetic. They said the feds came in, they took over, we have nothing to do with this. And they said, you're not wanted for anything. And basically I got a motel in Waco outside the property and just kind of watched everything unfold. And eventually, because of the disinformation that the FBI was giving to the media, I contacted the New York Times, the LA Times, and I was like, hey, I want to give our side of the story that I knew. And so I was contacted by the New York Times. I started doing interviews. At that time, there was like so much media here in the city. It was pretty crazy. So I started countering what the FBI was saying. Eventually, they wanted me to requested that I would help in the negotiations to get my friends to come out. And I was like, I told them I think they're well equipped to do their own negotiating. There's nothing I can say. But then the Texas Rangers wanted me for questioning. They were trying to put blame on why the element of surprise was lost in the raid. And they wanted to find out who was responsible for that. And because I was on the outside, they thought that I called and warned them that there was going to be a raid, which was totally untrue. I didn't even know it was going to take place. So within 2 weeks of the standoff, then I had a warrant for my arrest because I wouldn't cooperate with them, and I was talking to the media. And so I had my son with me. His mother lived in Las Vegas. So I said, hey, I'm going to take you, drop you off. And in the interim, when I was in Vegas, my son was on TV and said, hey, Dad, we're on America's Most Wanted, Armed and Dangerous. But a few days before that, they were requesting that I would be helping out in the negotiations. Now I'm on America's Most Wanted, just within a few days. So, I was like, yeah, this is pretty serious. So armed and dangerous, so now I know they're looking for me. So I told my son, at the time he was 14, I was like, either I'm going to drop you off at your mother's, which I know that there's going to be law enforcement, or we can have another plan. It's a long story. I ended up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. There were these people, I don't like to call them Christian patriots, people I didn't know that were wanting to help strangers. They were like, do not turn yourself in, we're going to help you, what do you need? And so that was still the standoff was still on. I was communicating with the media, and eventually when the fire took place, I flew from Spokane to Houston, Texas, and that's where I turned myself in to the Texas Rangers. To this day, I've never spoke to an FBI agent, never cooperated, never spoke to FBI, never spoke to ATF, only the Texas Rangers. So, and then like Clive said, we ended up in from Houston I went to Beaumont, from Beaumont, and then kind of met up with them in county jail, right? We were in county jail for 15 months. And he's right, we're in there. They think we're a bunch of crazy people, but remember at night, they would want to get locked in our cell with us because they felt safe. You're right. They were getting beat up, or new guys would come in the cell. They'd say it's like fresh meat. And yeah, they were terrorizing people. But I think what helped us is our strength of numbers and then just the fear factor. And we were harmless, right?
That's right.
So from there, we went to our trial. They had 215 witnesses. We had 7. Anybody that could have
Only two
testified, huh?
Only 2 testified.
Yeah, and anybody that could have testified in our behalf was gone. And so we pretty much hung tough, and it was not an easy experience. I guess you had a better lawyer than me. You got acquitted. No.
I heard recently that he was very upset with me.
He did not. The right thing was done. But we were acquitted of all the major. Their whole premise of their case was conspiracy to murder federal agents, which we were all acquitted of. That was their whole case. And then the second was conspiracy. So we were acquitted of all those charges. And I remember them reading the verdicts. They were so angry. You remember that? The judge turned beet red. He couldn't believe that we were acquitted. But they got us on the lesser charges, and so we got to go to Club Fed. Huh?
I said, you got railroaded.
No, I said you had a better lawyer. No, I'm kidding. I actually got a letter from the head juror when I was in... Well, I'll tell you, first, we were 15 months in county dungeons. You don't want to go to a county jail in Texas. It is the worst. It's concrete and metal, and it's cold, right? But we were sent to El Reno, which is a federal... it's where they process you before they send you off to the prisons you're going to go to. So that would be the last time, I think the 8 of us were together. We were all going to be separated across the country. And so we went in there. El Reno, Oklahoma is kind of a, it's country town, a lot of these. And I can remember we're all standing there in our boxers getting ready to be processed. And they're, who here has 5 years, who has 10 years, who has 15 years. And then they said, there's like about 100 guys there, maybe more. And then they said, who's a Branch Davidian? I mean, so it's like being fronted off in front of all these guys standing there in their boxers. So I was like, what is this about? And then that's when this guy, looks like a kind of, I want to say redneck football player, He's like, okay, we have cop killers here. So that's what he told this big group. So I was, I don't have a lot of experience in prison. I guess that was the first. But I can remember I was like, we're in trouble. And I wanted to say something, but I didn't because I'm on their turf. But after it was all over, all these guys started coming up and like shaking our hands and saying, and I was actually kind of scared because I thought, and so I started hearing the stories from the inside about when the raid took place. And so I spent, that was where I started. I went to FCI Latuna in New Mexico, then on to Safford, Arizona, and then Lompoc, Phoenix. So I was in quite a few different prisons, about 12 years, 7 months. I wouldn't recommend it. It's not a great experience, but it is what it is, and I got through it. But throughout that experience, I can remember I was at one prison. I was approached by these Hell's Angels. And I'm not a big guy. I'm not, but they wanted, they're like, hey, you're a Branch Davidian, we want you to tell us the story. So I met him out by the softball field, and you can imagine all these guys, muscles, shaved heads, tattoos, sitting there like a bunch of kids wanting a story. So there were those kind of things that happened throughout the experience. So one thing I wanted to say, you know, people of faith, you're looking at these people, you know, there were a lot of them, like I said, were my personal friends from Hawaii prior to the message, but people of faith are risk takers, you know, like entrepreneurs. They believe in something, and regardless of what the world says, you know, your family, your co-workers, your church, you take a leap in faith. And, you know, sometimes you can't understand it, you can't explain it, but, you know, in the end, I respect people like that. A lot of you, you know, I don't know what you understand or what, you know, we're just ordinary people. We come from different backgrounds, but this message or truth kind of brought us all together, and I personally, I have no regrets. You know, I have a lot of questions to ask God. You know, I miss the friends that we lost. You know, great people. You know, they can't be replaced ever, but, you know, you go on. You know, what can you do? So, any questions? Does anybody have any questions they want to ask, or I don't know if I said what you wanted. Yes, sir.
What did the head juror say to you? You said that she wrote you a letter.
Yes, Sarah, I think her name was Sarah Bain. So I was at FCI Latuna. I think I was just starting my, so she wrote a letter, or sent me a card, basically saying, you know, she was apologizing. You know, she said that we're really sorry about the sentences that you received. I got 15 years. I met other people in prison that had the same charges as me. The most they got was like 3. So the judge really went out of his way to give us longer sentences. So basically she said, you know, we're sorry, that wasn't the intention of the jury. You know, if we would have known the kind of sentences that you were going to receive, we would have just acquitted you of everything. And what people don't realize, in state prison, I think the jury decides the sentence. In the feds, the judge decides the sentence. So he was in control of that. So the way the system works is they give you a bunch of charges, and if you get off on some, they're going to get you on the lesser charges, and then they added extra time. So like I said, I should have, got probation. With my record, I had no record. So probation, or time served, but I got 15 years. So
What were you charged with specifically?
for the trial,
For you personally? What were
for
charged
you
with?
talking about for the trial, my charges were conspiracy to murder federal agents, aiding and abetting the murder of federal agents, the carrying a weapon during a commission of a crime.
You weren't there.
Yeah, but that's why they have conspiracy laws. They try to connect you with everything. And then the last 2 charges, aiding and abetting the manufacturing of automatic weapons, and then conspiracy on. So I had like 5 charges. I was acquitted of 3 of them. The major charges, if we were found guilty, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. It was game over, life. Now it's probably the death penalty, but so. Any other? Go ahead.
Over the years, I know you guys get a lot of questions about the raid and the actual siege and the event, April 19th.
Right.
But do you get people that want to know what David was actually teaching you guys, how it was? Because we know it, people have an understanding of what you believe, right? But do they want to know how you guys got to that belief?
I mean, from time to time, I live in San Diego, I own a restaurant, I'm work in the community. Some people know about my past, some don't, but from time to time, people will show up and want to talk. So sure, anybody that wants to sit down, I will, talk to them. I don't really go to the Adventist church. I mean, this was kind of my church. The church was the people. It wasn't a brick building. I know that Mount Carmel's out there and all that, but to me, it was about the people, and the message. So. I don't go. I went to some Adventist churches, but if they find out who I am, they're going to feel uncomfortable, and I just, I don't want to go through the whole, So, yes, sir.
Who was the judge that imposed the sentence on him?
Walter Smith. Is he still alive?
He was dismissed as judge in a Me Too incident.
Oh, really? So is, Walter Smith. Our case was very political. I think the government, call it the president, they were pulling the strings in our trial. So they needed their pound of flesh. They had to have somebody to blame for this. And unfortunately, they took a small group of people, survivors, the younger people, and they put us on trial, and they needed to have somebody be responsible for this because the ATF didn't even follow their own protocol. They were supposed to have the element of surprise was part of their raid plan, which was lost. I mean, it was obvious. They still went through with it. Right there, they should have aborted the mission, but, it is what it is. Yes, sir.
What was the evidence that they presented on manufacturing weapons?
As you know, the crime scene was burnt, so they had some burnt pieces of gun stocks or whatever. I'm trying to remember exactly what they had. It wasn't much. So again, like I said with the jury, it's kind of like a psychological thing. Well, we know you're not guilty of that, but maybe you're guilty of this, so we're going to find you guilty just to kind of keep it okay. Anybody else? Yes.
How many of the people that were in Austin ended up going to trial?
What was the first part of your question? How many?
How many people in Austin went to trial that went to?
Oh, just me. I was the only one.
Oh.
I was with my son. He was 14 years old at the time, so.
I thought you were at a gun show in Austin.
Yes, I was.
You were just you didn't have a table set up. You wasn't selling guns.
No, I had a table set up. Yes, sir.
Then who operated it when you left?
Well, it was the last day of the gun show. It was Sunday. So I packed everything up, put it in the car, and I headed back to Waco.
Okay, so you didn't get here till late Sunday night, basically.
Yes. And that day, the 28th, is my birthday. So the reason why I took my son, I was like, hey, after the show, because he'd help me, we're going to go have pizza or something. So I had my son with me on that Sunday. So it was just kind of random, I didn't know what was going to happen.
What kind of guns did you have at Mount Carmel, and what were you selling at the gun show? As far as, are we talking 223? Are we talking
I think-
308?
You know, believe it or not, I was at a gun show, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not a gun expert. I mean, I come from a family of entrepreneurs. I know a lot about running businesses, and I kind of just was learning about that. But I can say there was AK-47s, AR-15s, maybe Rugers, you know, some other random type. We had a friend, his name was Henry McMahon, he was a gun dealer, and he was friends with David. And this is back when I think Clinton got into office and they were going to ban weapons, and he was like encouraging, he was like saying, hey, you should buy a lot of these guns because their value is going to double or triple, which really happened. So those were some of the type of firearms that we had.
The reason I was asking is after the fire, they made this presentation photo where they have all these weapons set up, and those all look like 308s. Looks like fairly larger caliber guns.
It's possible, you know.
I was wondering whether those were actually yours, whether they belonged there at Mount Carmel, or whether they just brought those in. They didn't look like they were really
It's possible. I mean, I disappointed a lot of people because I'm not a gun expert, so Anybody else have a, yes, sir?
Were any of those automatics, not semi-automatics?
Look, at the time, the arrest warrant was, this whole premise for this raid was over gun parts. I don't even know if they're legal anymore, these Hellfire things that you put on the trigger that can make a gun fire more than one bullet. When I was on Mount Carmel, I hardly ever fired a gun, and I've never fired an automatic weapon ever in my life. Now, was it there? Was it converted during the siege? I don't know to answer that question.
Would you have ever sold an automatic weapon at a gun show?
Never. Never. Never bought one, never sold one, ever. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I had heard in the final attack on the Branch Davidians, you guys, a radio broadcast, about 20 to 30 Davidians had exited the building. And then after that one radio report, I heard nothing. I was covering it during the shows at the time. And then later we find out that about, 20, 27 were shot in the back, the kitchen side. That's where the ATF had machine gun sniper nest. But then, of course, the ATF and FBI sealed off the area, and it looked like the bodies were bulldozed back in.
Well, I was not
Information on that?
I was not physically on the scene. He's the one that can answer that question, because I was that Jimmy Riddle. Is that where that happened out in the back?
No, I'm talking about right at the collusion of the fire. When the fire was raging, I'd heard specifically that 20 to 30 had escaped the east side, which is the
I don't
kitchen
think
side.
I don't think so.
If you ever listen to the news about any catastrophe, they never get the numbers right on the first reporting. As the day goes on, they change their story, over and over.
Well, I thought it might be true because nobody, after that, they reported it once, nobody reported it again, and then there were about that many
I heard
bodies
reports. I heard reports that people did try to come out the back, out of the cafeteria area, and one report I had, this guy claimed to be up in the sniper position up at the dairy, He said he actually saw it. He said a woman came out with 2 young girls, and they shot at her, and she ran back in. Jimmy Riddle came out, from what I hear. The report from the dairy was there's a man come out with a backpack on, and he's making his way between the swimming pool and the gymnasium. Next thing, they said, oh, he's fallen down. And then that's the end of the announcement. Later on, the CEV that was bulldozing the gymnasium, tearing it up, tearing it down, whichever way you want to go, it loses a track. The track comes off the cogs, And if you see pictures of it, something jammed between the belt and the cogs. Something red. They say that when they finally found Jimmy Riddle, which we believe he was shot out there and bulldozed back in, but he was wearing a jacket that had a red lining. So it's hard to say for a truth as to who got killed where or how many got out or came out and got driven back in or bulldozed back in. We don't know. The way the government had it was that we killed everybody in there and then we escaped. That's one of the stories that's being promoted by law enforcement and by the media. I was interviewed by Peter Van Zandt, and he got so involved in asking questions that he actually got angry. He's getting in my face. And he says, you lit the fire, and then you left and let all your friends to die. Their story in the trial was, they were shooting each other all over the place, I was just glad when the autopsy reports came in that the bodies that were found behind the chapel where we escaped from, those that came out of that hole on the side, that not one of the ones that died in the fire behind us had been shot. But they do try to claim that we burned the others to death. We were a bunch of cowards,
Harry's got a question.
Just a quick question. You talked about the censorship that you dealt with in the Adventist church, which I'm sure people in here have dealt with that in their own churches. But what part of David's message, I know it's been a long time, but if you could think back to the beginning of when you were first introduced to that message, is there a part of it that sticks out in your mind that really sparked something in you?
Well, I can say from my part, I was at Diamond Head Seventh-day Adventist Church in Honolulu, Hawaii. I remember the message came. They were, specifically talking about the prophecies, the book of Revelation. I was always into the book of Revelation, wanting to understand that. I mean, as Adventists, we're supposed to be pursuing truth, wanting to understand truth as it is. But I remember he was bringing up issues about prophecy, tying in the prophets with the book of Revelation. And I can remember the what is he? The head guy for the church in what position is he? The head
President.
The president of the general conference. So he came into the church and he was like, hey, I know you, you're all friends of mine. He's like, it's not important. I remember the guy saying, it's not important to know the book. It's just, you need to just kind of love God or love Jesus. I mean, and for him to say that, And he's the head of the organization. And then we presented it to a lot of the pastor of the church and other ones. They had no answers. It was always kind of weak. So what happened is a lot of us, people that have passed, where we were members of the Diamond Head Church, we had to go before the church, and they had a, what's that called when you go before your congregation?
Disfellowship.
Excommunicate, I don't know what you call it. So we had to go there, and it was like thumbs up or thumbs down, and we all got kicked out of church. Pretty much. And I mean, we had all been part of the church, very active, paying tens of thousands of dollars in tithe and supporting, and we all got removed from the church. So, yes, sir.
My question's about the destruction of evidence after how the FBI.
You know, you're right. I was just talking about that. So a key piece of evidence was the front door.
Right.
Disappeared.
Because they scraped could you comment on how they scraped the ground? Because when we rebuilt the church, we filled up coffee cans full of stick rounds, and I mean, they were just everywhere. And if you could comment on that.
Well, I was in prison during the rebuild, so I'm not going to be able to comment on that. These guys were 13 years I was gone.
Get up here, Dave.
You sure?
Yeah, come on up.
I'm recording this, by the way, for us there.
Yeah, put it up.
Good job, Paul, by the way.
No, I'm just telling it like it is. You know?
Over here to Mike. Speak.
What was the question? What? Destruction of evidence.
How you got rid of all the evidence.
Oh, how I got rid of all the evidence, yeah. There was a lot of destruction of evidence. I mean, front door that was missing, obviously, that's the big one. Had all the bullet holes coming from the outside in. The two attorneys, Dick DeGuerin and Jack Zimmerman, came in and they saw evidence of that. The place burning to the ground really was the best lack of evidence the government could have hoped for, because we have bullet holes in the ceiling, bullet holes in the water tanks. That one of them went through the water tank and killed Winston Blake in one of the rooms there. So that's a ton of evidence that really would not have served the government very well. The place burning, in my mind, is the best thing the government could have hoped for. A couple of the other things that I think are really interesting, they said for years and years that there were no pyrotechnic devices used at Mount Carmel. That was the people inside. Everyone still thinks, well, maybe not this room, but a lot of people still think that the Davidians inside there set that fire. It's just simply not true. Clive Doyle has never said that. I didn't see anyone setting a fire or pouring fuel. All those, when you hear the tapes where people are saying spread some here, put some here, those tapes, they claim were at 6 a.m. If people are spreading fuel at 6 a.m., then why didn't the fire start at 6 a.m.? The fire didn't start till 12 noon, 12 hours, 6 hours after they're claiming that people are staying and sitting, spreading fuel everywhere. So their own evidence doesn't make any sense to me. But I think what's really important is the fact that 4 pyrotechnic devices were found at the evidence locker in Austin. So it is a lack of evidence, and it's evidence that has been discovered that was denied for years and years. And imagine that, the FBI denied it for years and years and years, and then finally they say, oh, we're sorry. Yeah. There actually were some pyrotechnic devices in there, but the Davidians still started the fire. Really, it's incredulous. It's they lie. It's not, it's known, that the government lies to protect itself. It's not a surprise, really. I'm sure there's probably other evidences that we're not thinking of. Can you think of any? I know there's the...
Well, the bodies that were in the refrigerator.
That's right. They had a lot of the bodies afterwards, not to get too, graphic, or they were put in a air-conditioned cooler that apparently the cooler in July stopped working, so a lot of the bodies were
Turned off.
turned off, yeah.
Could somebody talk about the rumors of the explosion? Maybe a detonation?
The explosion actually was, and that's a good question. There was that big explosion that you see as the place is burning. What do they call it? That's a propane tank. That's the propane tank that was in the back of the building. And you could tell if you see the fire on that day where the place is burning, it's really dark. It's black cloud of dark chemical smoke. It's chemical because the CS gas is burning off. They put a 3-day amount of CS gas in that building in a 6-hour period. 3-day amount, that's incredible. CS gas is a riot control agent only to be used outdoors, never indoors. And under the Geneva Convention, we can't use it in the time of war because it's so dangerous, especially to kids whose little lungs can't handle it. That's the gas they used in that building. Only to be used outdoors as a riot control agent, never to be used indoors. They put so much gas in there, they killed those kids. Those kids died of asphyxiation. The ones that were in the concrete structure, they had no place to go. That was their solution. Okay, the federal government gassed children and women and a building full of people, and then they want to blame us. It's really, it's, okay, I've probably done you all a great disservice because I've been reading Howard Zinn's The People's History of the United States. Yeah, so I'm not too pleased with our society and how it works, but seriously, what the government did is so, I can't find words for how barbaric it is to gas a bunch of kids and say, this is the plan that we had to save the kids, to save the children. They wanted to save the children. That's just awesome to me. I don't know if I answered the question, but sorry, but let me do real quick. So that black smoke is the CS gas burning off. And if you notice, if you go back and watch the video, that big explosion, it's real clear. It's clear. It's a clear burn, and it dissipates very quickly. That's propane. And that's the difference. That's where you can tell the difference between the actual different kinds of fire that you're seeing.
Can you run through who was injured on the initial raid and what kind of injuries they were carrying around during the siege? If you could kind of run through.
Mostly, the ones that I remember during the siege were David Koresh being shot through the side and in the hand, and I remember Judy Schneider's finger, pretty specifically.
Scott
Sonobi. Yeah, but he died.
No, he was shot in the leg.
He was shot in the leg, yeah, and then went through, he died at the end. And Jaden Wendell was shot, I guess, in the head? Wasn't she shot?
David Jones was shot, but nobody knew about it until almost the end of the siege. One of the nurses came down one day and says, guess what, I just took a bullet out of David Jones's rear end. I guess he was too embarrassed to say, oh, no.
I don't remember that story.
Are you familiar with the Canes Film Festival and when the award was given to the guy who invented infrared?
The award was given to him?
Well,
For the infrared?
what happened, I had a media person give this to me, which I won't name, but he was pretty sick about it because the guy that invented infrared, he had an airplane flying over the compound, and infrared from at that time was known to be only to identify heat at night, but it also identifies heat in the day if you reverse the film. And nobody knew it at the time, and he said that whenever the people were trying to run out the back, sailors saw the muzzle flashes on the backside where they were trying to shoot. Do you know about that?
Yeah, the infrared video, you can actually see three different positions of gunfire. The first one was the tanks coming back at the very back of the building. You see 2 explosions right at the back. The tanks have gone in, if you can try to picture this, and to the gymnasium area. They collapsed the gymnasium area, and there was like a bull run that went all the way to the other side of the building. You see two bright flashes there on that infrared, and then you see from the tanks a burst of gunfire. And the thought is that could be them shooting at Jimmy Riddle. And then later on, as the fire is burning, this is before the fire, and then as the fire is burning, you see fully automatic weapons fire from two different tank positions outside of the tanks. So it's someone that is near the tank firing into the building. There's a lot of apparently question about the infrared. I don't know. To me, I see the infrared. It's very clear what happened. We have some autopsy reports of people being shot with bullet wounds in the center of their head and the center of their chest. You don't kill yourself that way. Pirwani's crew actually said that they thought this was more of a homicide than a mass suicide. And I've always agreed with that. What bothered me for years, okay, there we go. What bothered me for years, and still bothers me greatly, is when I was piecing, I'd gone through the experience, but being there is one thing. Then looking at everything outside of you is a totally different story. So I'm very comfortable telling my story of what happened to me, and I can live with myself. That's what happened to me. All the other stuff, the external stuff, is equally as important. But if you don't see it, it's kind of hard to believe. Like, I didn't want to believe my government shot my friends trying to escape the building. There's a part of me that said, okay, you know what? They screwed up really bad, and maybe some bad decisions were made on both sides during the siege, absolutely. But they wouldn't kill people trying to escape. I could see my friends maybe dying as martyrs and being scared to go out there. I was scared to leave. I exited at the last second when the wall behind me caught fire and I could hear my hair singeing. And the only reason I left is because I didn't want to burn to death. But I swear to God, I exited that building thinking they were going to shoot me because of the 51 days, because of the helicopters buzzing the building. You know, for months after, I would hear a helicopter and I would be on the ground under my bed. That's being back in Maine. So that's how, the helicopters is what affected me the most, and I didn't realize that till much later. So I went through whatever PTSD, we didn't, you know, there wasn't really a name for it back then. But what really happened, really made me angry, was I had these autopsy reports. There was like 14, 15 of them. Bullet wounds down the head, bullet wounds down the chest. How does that happen? How does that happen? 15 times. How does that happen? Where are these people? How did that happen? But I didn't think about it. Then William Gazecki and Mike McNulty, when they were doing the Waco, the Rules of Engagement, which is the document that really turned a lot of heads. One of the things that started, and I want to take a moment because I'm getting a little excited here. I wanted to start with acknowledgments. I want to acknowledge you, Dick Rivas, for Ashes of Waco. Very wonderful. Thank you for writing that book and really kind of got the ball started, I would say, in all earnestness. Kathy, thank you for everything. Kathy Wessinger. She's written some wonderful books as well. Just thank you guys, all the authors. James Tabor, Phil Arnold, who aren't here. I'd like to thank them. They gave us hope through the siege. It was because of them that David Kress decided to write down the Seven Seal manuscript. And to us, that's when they really came in with a CS gas attack plan, when David started to actually write it down. That's how a Davidian would say. See, a lot of people say they try to get into government conspiracy stuff. We look at it kind of more spiritual. David had something. He said he had something. Said the people were going to fight against it and wipe it out. That's what happened. So that's a very simplistic term to put it in. We could get way more complicated, which we won't. Anyway, there was a question, and I got really sidetracked, but I think it was a good question. So who was that last question? I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. No one remembers?
You put them to sleep.
What?
You put them to sleep.
I did. I put him to sleep, didn't I?
Oh, what made you really mad?
Oh, thank you. That's it. What made me really mad. See how this works, huh? So what made me really mad was going to Mike McNulty's and William Gazecki's house and seeing the infrared video for the first time ever. And it was a much clearer version that you can see in the film because, you know, every generation goes down one. So in the version that I saw, there's two tanks, and I could almost see the outline of a person. And then I could see the fully automatic weapons flashes from two different positions as the place is burning. So that gave me, that's when I put together, oh my God, there's the autopsy reports right there. They're being shot. They're trying to exit the building and they're being shot and they're being killed. My friends were gunned down by this government. we want to get the kids out. Then why did you gas them in a concrete structure with a gas that you're not even supposed to use in warfare against other nations, but you can use it on your own people? It's sick. It's disgusting. It's evil is what it is. So then there's the video of these people being shot as they're trying to escape the building. And you don't see the people trying to escape the building, but you see the fully automatic weapons fire. That's it. That visual, it put it together for me. But what it really did is it shattered everything I believed in my country and what my country could do and was capable of. Being raised by a history teacher, someone who believed and understood the Constitution and had read the Constitution from a very young age. Catherine Schroeder had this conversation with our friend Eddie. David Koresh said to her 6 months before everything happened, what are you going to do when the helicopters are buzzing the building? But helicopters are never going to buzz the building, David. This is America. David Koresh and I are on a roof, and we're repairing the roof, and Tibbs, what are you going to do when the tanks are out there running up and down the Double E Ranch Road? That's never going to happen, David. This is America. They're not going to bring tanks onto this property. 6 months later, I'm watching tanks run up and down the Double E Ranch Road. So, I've had my worldview shattered many times through this process. But seeing the fully automatic weapons fire really did it for me. And I remember I was giving talks at that time all over the country, despite the fact that people were getting me canceled by saying I was a government agent. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. People have said I'm a government agent. They got me canceled in some talks that I had initially scheduled after this. And I'm listening to Rage Against the Machine every day, just trying to get the courage up to talk to an audience every day for 6 months, seriously. So I had a very bad experience starting off. Anyway, I got pretty good. I started talking to groups. All of a sudden, the groups are 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700. Now I'm doing preparedness expos all over the country. And then I saw the infrared video. And I asked them if I could borrow the infrared for my next talk, which was, I think it was like 600 or 700 people at a preparedness expo. And I was showing it on the screen. I was giving my talk. I had my little laser pointer. And I'm pointing to where the fully automatic weapons fire was. And I'm yelling, and I'm screaming. And I'm like, they're killing them. You see what's going on here? I'm just out of control. And I didn't realize this until I got back to my table, and I was signing books for people. I actually wrote a book. So I signed books for people, and someone came up to me and said, that was a great talk, very passionate. I learned a lot. Thank you, Dave. But you're very angry. And when that person said that I'm very angry, it's like I came out of my body and I went back and I saw what I'd just done. And I saw that I was in an audience in front of 600 people, totally out of control, just totally angry. And I had no way to control that anger. And I said, oh, wow, I can't do this anymore. That's the day I moved back to Maine. I started playing drums and I stopped talking about it. It's only been very recently that I started talking about it again. Because I could not deal with that anger. And you see it when someone cuts me off, you see it, it's very short wick kind of thing. When someone accuses me of being a government agent, for an example, makes me crazy, whatever. Everyone has the right to believe what you want to believe. So anyway, my point is, I stopped talking after that because it so shattered my worldview of things and my own government. I've never recovered. I'm just so angry and disgusted with the federal government that they could just go and kill a bunch of kids and not even apologize to us. Throw Paul Fata. When Paul was out on the run, and I remember inside we were listening to news reports, and they said, Paul's America's Most Wanted. We're like, Paul Fata is America's Most... We couldn't believe it. It was like, what is going on here? The fix was really in. I gotten up here intending to tell a totally different story. This is taking a really weird turn, but it's kind of a cool turn too, so we're just going to go with it. When they said that you were... I couldn't... He's the most peaceful guy, seriously, like you and Clive. If you just get to know these people, you're just like, these are not cop killers. They're not criminals. These are not what the government made them out to be. It's just terrible. It's been horrendous. It's been horrendous. Yes?
I was just going to say, let me explain what I learned in the trial. The government wanted to get us one way or the other, and because they weren't succeeding, they went into a great explanation of what conspiracy meant to them. Conspiracy is if two people are over here in this corner talking to each other, and they say, you know, Fred, I can't stand that guy. I hate his guts. And if the next time I see him, I'm going to punch him out. And somebody else is over here and they hear that. And they don't report that to the police. If something happens to Fred, he's part of this conspiracy because he's protecting their confession or their planning or whatever. So the way they reasoned with us was, if you went to church and David Koresh gave the Bible study or whatever, you were in collusion. You like that word? You were a conspirator. When we heard David talk about prophecy, about what was coming, whatever, when he bought guns or took us all to a restaurant, whatever, we should have run down to the police and reported him every time he said something that made us, you know, raise our eyebrows. We were in agreement. So that was their justification in going after. See, they couldn't get David. David was dead after the fire. Steve Schneider was dead. Wayne Martin was dead. The ones that they consider were David's right-hand men, or his lieutenants, as they wanted to call them, they were all dead. So all you got now is a few people, women, men, that escaped. So we got to get somebody. Somebody has to pay, as Paul said.
Well, I thank you for being there, and they didn't come after me. It's better.
Say that again?
It's better for me as a 11-year-old that they didn't come after me. So thank you for being there to keep them focused not on me.
By the way, incidentally, real quick,
Fill it for me.
I intended to start by introducing Scott is here. Scott Mab, he was 11 years old. He came out of the building. He was Michael Schroeder's stepson. He's here today for the first time. And I had wanted to introduce you, but it went right to questions, which kind of threw me for a loop.
It's all Paul's fault, remember?
Look, I spent all this time preparing notes. I had notes. I was ready.
Hello, everyone. I'm Scott. I was 11 when it happened. This is actually my first time back. Like what David was just talking about, why he stopped talking about it. Kind of why I didn't start. I kind of already knew once I was old enough to, start to be educated about what had happened and everything like that. Because when we first got out, my dad kept us away from it. We didn't watch the TV. All the perspectives that many of you may have of watching the news and seeing the 51-day standoff, I don't even have that perspective.
So who's your mother, just so everyone knows?
Catherine Schroeder. Mike Schroeder in the top corner there. My stepfather. Sorry.
Do you mind if I just say something?
Not really good. Go ahead.
The stepfather was, Michael Schroeder was killed the first day trying to sneak back into the building to get to his family. And one of the ATF guys saw him, they shot him. And then it was actually, the belief is that he was shot execution style because there were bullet wounds at the back of the head. That was
after bullets
first
that were already in the body too. There were several shots that were on the body that would have been shots that would have taken him down. And then you can only put the picture together yourself. Also, one of the missing evidence things, from what I hear, is that he had a beanie. And that was a Mike thing. That was a habit of his to wear a beanie. He was supposedly wearing one then that magically disappeared in the evidence as well. Which, had there been someone who shot him close range behind the head, there would have been residue. Come up with your own theories from there on.
In other words, just to clarify real quick, Dr. Interrupt. No. In other words, they said there was no residue at the back of his head, therefore he wasn't shot at close range, but his cap was missing.
Yeah.
So obviously the cap would have had the residue, and then the cap doesn't show up in any of the evidence.
Magically disappears.
I'm done now.
We never know how it happens when things just disappear. I've watched a lot of the congressional interactions and stuff like that. trials and whatnot, and it's always, I always find it interesting how when they respond to that kind of question of where is this at, just like they stand there and shrug their shoulders like, okay, I don't understand how you cannot understand. You're supposed to be in a position where you should understand. So, but anyways, when we left, my dad and my stepmother kept us away from it and whatnot. So I didn't actually start to educate myself and learn about it until years later, probably realistically until I was an adult age. So I was looking at it, and it was interesting you said that earlier about having experienced it and then coming back looking at it from a different perspective later in life. That's kind of how I looked at it too. It was something I experienced. I have all my memories. I was there for 3 years. I remember a lot. I remember the initial firefight. But I was 11. So for me, you know, these guys can answer these questions, the theological questions, those other stuff. I was an 11-year-old kid. I can't really answer any of those questions. Did we do things?
You could talk about how you felt.
Kevin Jones said that Kathy had some of the children reloading.
I did reload magazine.
And do you remember what caliber you were loading? Would you have any opinion on it now? Were they 223 or 3?
I'm an 11-year-old. Much like Paul was stating, I'm not a gun expert. I served in the military, and that's been about the only time I shot, maybe a 12-gauge hunting with my dad when I was a kid. But I've never been a really big weapon person myself, so I wouldn't be able to tell you any of that stuff. I mean, it was a little curved magazine, and all I remember feeling, my thumbs hurt. Really made my thumbs hurt. It was really hard to push those in there.
Right. Okay.
So, but we did actually do that.
Just to clarify, so there's no confusion, on day one, you guys weren't reloading. In fact, take us back to day one, February 20th.
Oh, no.
You guys
That,
weren't armed, right? What happened?
If my memory serves correct, that was all after the raid stuff. I don't remember any interactions with guns. I do remember occasionally, rarely seeing, they had a short little range with targets or something where there was some adults over there shooting. The kids weren't around it though, when we were doing our kid stuff. All of that kind of activity, loading weapons and stuff like that, the hustle and bustle of it being almost like a war zone, that was all after the raid. Prior to that, it was being a kid. We ran around and played outside and did what mommy and daddy told us to do. There was the things that people accuse, and oh, this was going on there, that was going on there, especially related to the weapons and any kind of inappropriate activities by David. I was an 11-year-old kid. I didn't see none of that. I didn't see anything inappropriate, nothing. I mean, yeah, I was one of the older kids.
You weren't abused?
No, David spanked me one time. We did something wrong. Go figure, you do something wrong, you get disciplined. That's how it works. But were we abused? No. He almost always left the disciplinary actions to the parents. Only did he do so, and the one time that I did get spanked by David, it was me, Cyrus, and Joseph Martins, I believe, if I'm correct. I'm a little off there. We had gotten into some old stuff on the property, got some sugar, and we got in trouble for that. He didn't just come in, you little kids all mad and angry and whoop us and nothing like that. He turned it into a moment to teach something. He turned it into a lesson for not only us, but the entire community. I remember there being other people involved in this disciplinary action, not in shaming us or anything like that, but to teach everybody. I mean, I remember him fairly well, and I remember having this, viewpoint of him as this important person in this community that we were living in. And I've had even my mother say that they didn't like him. That he was an ass or something, or didn't really like his character. But I remember having that kind of feeling as well, that he had this presence and he told you what to do and stuff like that, but he was always seemed like a decent guy to me. So the thought and whatnot and the accusations that he would have been abusing us, beating us, that we were mistreated or something, I don't remember a time in my life that I was better treated than while I was there.
When did you discover you were a cult?
When I guess
that with jest,
when I was watching all the news and stuff, when I finally started to educate myself, that's when I started to see the cult stuff, and I'm going, what's a cult? And then I had to look up that and educate. I'm going, okay, well, by that definition, you could pretty much label all kinds of stuff a cult. And as I love the way that he put it earlier, it's culture. That's what we had there. We had a community of people who were like-minded. We wanted to do the same things. That's all it was.
real quick too, I just want to add to this because I've had a wonderful experience of really getting to know Heather again and her beautiful family who lives out at Mount Carmel now. And those kids have brought life back to Mount Carmel, just wonderful. But Heather has said that she didn't know what racism was until she got into the school system in Waco. She had no idea that there was a difference between black and white. These were the kids that she played with. Everyone loved each other. And then she gets in the school system and all of a sudden it's like, how come you're hanging out with the black, you can't hang out with the black kids. You gotta hang out with them. She's like, what? I mean, they're just kids. So it's not until she got into the system here that she even realized that there was a color line, which I just wanted to make that point.
I was lucky enough to go into a military family where you're also very colorblind as well. So I didn't even really have an understanding, much like you're saying of Heather, of what that would be like. We played with the Martin kids all the time. They were, that's the house that we went to, and actually being back on the property for the first time in 26 years, I believing, because I want to think that it's true, I'm not positive yet, but that there's the same tree there in front of the Martin's house that I used to play in every day. And I went by and saw it, and it's like I remember falling down from there. There was no
Did you get some
who was who. Yeah. There was no who was who and who's important. I mean, as a kid, naturally you see things as a young kid, especially, okay, well, Cyrus, that's David's kid, so he's a little more important than we are, and you develop those little interactions with them. But there was no, you're an enemy of me. Everyone was part of a family, no matter who you were. These were people who came and went. I didn't feel immediately. The Joneses were born and raised into the Branch Davidians. I came in when I was 8. I already had my moral compass. I was raised on the Bible prior to ever going there. So it wasn't a big shock for me. It was just a small transition over to something a little bit more structured and a little different. I don't have a toilet that flushes anymore, and I can't turn my light on. I gotta light the kerosene lantern. So when we left, I didn't have any experience with it. It wasn't until my later life that I started to educate myself. I ended up doing much like David did. I really just started to go, wow, I didn't really think it was this bad. I wanted to believe that the government would have done this correctly, and they should have done it correctly. There was no way they would do this stuff, and I've done the same thing, researched and watched all the FLIR footage.
They did nothing
I went into a phase of, I want to know as much as I can. And I did everything I could, watched everything I could, and I did much, he said it extremely well. It just really started to tear down my trust and understanding and why. How could you ever let that happen that way? My thing I always say is, if David goes off the property on a regular basis, why couldn't you have done it that way? I apprehended him, spoke to him there, issue your warrants or whatever off property. That never happens. My stepfather would be standing next to me today. Excuse me. One thing that I hope that everyone takes, that I hope to be able to add to this, is that what happened here was a tragedy, but not because of the Branch Davidians or the government or who did what and all this kind of stuff. It was a tragedy because there were completely innocent people who did not have a choice, who weren't capable of making the choice that David was to come out or stay in. These were people who were doing what they were told, little children, some of them lucky enough, like myself, to have been able to leave, who had another relative who would come get us. Some of them did not have that. Those people did not make a choice. They didn't have a choice any way, shape, or form. That's why this is a tragedy. That's what I hope that people remember about that. I know it's important to be, informed and know who did what, where, and what was wrong and all that kind of stuff. As long as you always remember those that were truly innocent, who did not make any decisions in anything, who didn't decide to shoot at cops. One last thing, I will be here for the rest of the day. I will gladly talk about stuff. Do remember, as I said before, I was 11, did not understand the theology, was not there during the 51-day raid, but I will gladly tell you what I remember, what it was like for me living there 3 years prior. I can tell you who the people were, not what happened. Any immediate questions?
Where are you going from there?
Where am I going from here?
No, I mean, not today. Where are you?
Me with my
headed?
life?
Where is your head headed?
My 2 daughters. That's all that really drives me in world today. Like I said before, I have looked back and become somewhat of a pessimist about the world we live in. But when I became a father, changed. I reestablished some hope, or at least some reason. And that's what drives me today. Doing whatever I can for them, making sure that they have a good future, and hopefully one better than what we're presenting for our children right now. So
It's beautiful, Scott.
Paul and David, you guys both made comments earlier about the warrant being signed within days after Clinton took office. Does anybody ever go back to GHWB when it all started and put the trail all back into his
I've actually
pocket?
asked that question before too.
I have not.
Can you,
Because BATF started to come after the Branch Davidians under the George Herbert Walker Bush administration. It was after Bill Clinton took office that Janet Reno was thrown into this position by Mr. Sessions, and and she didn't know what to do. But it was handed off to her by the previous administration. Excuse me.
Did you want to say something first?
I don't know a lot of it. I think Janet Reno was a pawn. She was duped by the FBI. They told her, they went in there, they wanted a reason to do the raid or whatever, I should say the extraction by fire, whatever it is they did. But I think they just used her to do what they wanted to do. I have not researched it. I don't know. I just think, again, there's people in high places that are pulling strings. They didn't want anybody to take responsibility, so they wanted their pound of flesh. Here it is.
But it was presented as Operation Showtime.
Which, that was the ATF name for the...
Yeah, but
Right. And
like
that started before.
Presidents come and go every 4 to 8 years.
Right.
The FBI and the ATF, they're around. They stay. But they'll do whatever they can to protect their budget. And they screwed up so bad at Ruby Ridge, they needed something
there's
big.
the key point, Ruby Ridge. This was to gain, they were talking about disbanding the ATF. They had problems. So their raid with us was to regain confidence with their agency and get money and funding, and they blew it. I mean, they should have never done the raid. And as you said, why didn't they just arrest David? The warrant was for, the original warrant was for one person, was for David, nobody else. So if they would have just dealt with him, it would have avoided this. But that's not the way they wanted to do it. They wanted showtime, they wanted a big production, and it backfired. It went wrong.
Did they have,
Can I add one point before there's another question? Do you don't mind? Because I'll forget, and I don't want to forget, especially since Kathy is in the...
I give the okay.
So thanks, because Kathy's in the building. Recently, I've been reminded of a theory. I think it's interesting. I don't know if it's true. I'd like to talk to you about this, Catherine, after. CUT, Church Universal and Triumphant, Claire Prophet, very, very big group that had a tank. They had just purchased a tank. So I had just been reminded recently that the very possibility is Waco was the stage to go after CUT, Church Universal and Triumphant, after had this been successful. But because it wasn't, apparently what had happened is the FBI made a deal with her where she got rid of the tank, they wouldn't come in and attack. So I think that's true. Maybe someone could help me with that later. I just want to bring that up because I was just reminded of this and it kind of made sense. Yes, Catherine?
I don't know that Church Universal and Triumphant had a tank. Maybe they did, and I went out there after everything happened in Waco. They brought some scholars because Church Universal and Triumphant, they were worried that they were going to be next. They did have weapons. I don't know what kind of weapons. Mainly what they had was a big underground bunker for, she was predicting a nuclear strike from Russia. And I actually went into that bunker. That was quite an experience. But it was a shelter. It was really a fallout shelter. I'm I shouldn't use the FBI words, they would call it a fallout shelter. And, maybe they had a tank, maybe not, but, I don't necessarily see the two things connected, except that the ATF would have been interested in them, because I think Elizabeth Clare Crockett's husband, he did buy some weapons under an assumed name,
Okay.
which is illegal. So I think that was
Thank
the
you.
weapons charge that they were.
I appreciate that insight very much. We're still learning. It's crazy.
Before everybody comes up with new questions or decides to leave, I think we ought to have the reading of the names. We usually try to have it around 12 o'clock when it happened. I think we're beyond that now. I think there's like 2 hours gone by. So if we'll go through the process of reading the names of those that died, and who's going to ring the...
How about a quick 30-second stretch? Anyone just want to stretch for a second? We can all do it together and look stupid together? And a nice...
It's kind of warm in here.
Yeah, it is.
You get some air. People are asleep.
I have a couple museum notes for you.
Got a lot of
The room upstairs dedicated to the Branch Davidians will be open. It has a scale model of the building for all newcomers that haven't seen it. It's a wonderful
So I turn off
little exhibit. That'll be open after the reading of names. Also, there's a book that has to say that you were here for all the next century's history. So if you sign that, the museum appreciates that. I guess so, yeah, it's close by. So if you want to sign that, that's great. But what's really important is that you might get a chance to see what's up on the walls and the scale model upstairs.
What's that?
Hopefully there'll be enough specifics to you when you get up there. Thank you.
Part of some other evidence.
I'll start reading the names.
Anybody want to take over the bell? Get to the dish, lady.
Hey, should I go up there? You want to get up there? Let's see. You sure?
This is the beard and then...
Everybody ready? Ron, turn it off. I said turn it off. We're going to read the names at this time of those that died, beginning with February 28th, which was the day of the raid. First name is Winston Blake. Winston Blake was from England. He was 28 years old, and he was engaged to another British subject by the name of Beverly Elliott, which you'll see in a little bit. He was the guy that was sitting in his room at the time of the raid when the helicopter shot through the water tanks and killed him. Later on, I got the job of burying him and several other people, Perry Jones, Peter Hipsman. I'll tell you when I get to them, I guess. Second one killed on February 28th was Peter Gent from Australia. He was 24. He was a twin. He had a twin sister who died 51 days later. Peter Hipsman was an American. from New York, but he came to us from Hawaii. He was 28. He was killed in what they called the dog run, which was like a hallway over the gymnasium at the back. Harry Dale Jones was an American, age 64. He was David Koresh's father-in-law. He was the one that was shot at the front door next to David. The next one for February 28th was Michael Schroeder, age 29, stepfather to Scott. Unlike the other ones we just read, Mike Schroeder was not on the property at the time of the raid. He was downtown at a building we had rented for fixing cars, and it was called the Mag Bag. Somehow they got word, I don't know whether they saw it on the news or whether somebody called them, but there was Bob Kendrick, Mike Schroeder, and a young guy from England down at the Mag Bag, and they decided to make their way out to Mount Carmel. Of course, you couldn't get to Mount Carmel directly because all the roads were blocked off. And so they cut around in a kind of a big semicircle and came in from over near Axtell through the fields till they got to a creek. And they were following the creek bed to try to come into Mount Carmel from the back. Mike Schroeder was out the front. Bob Kendrick was at the back. He was an older gentleman. Unbeknown to them, the ATF had 17 agents on the property at the back in a barn belonging to our neighbor. They'd been there all day, since like 7 in the morning. So there came a point in the afternoon when they got a radio call saying, pack it in, it's all over, head back to the staging area. So they all stood up and started walking across the field until all of a sudden somebody up front says, hey, there's somebody down in the creek. So they all hit the ground and started shooting into the creek. They shot Mike several times, like you just learned. But then they went down and gave him the coup de grace, as they say, the finishing off shots in the back of the head. When we were in jail, the young guy from England that had been part of the group, he had surrendered to the ATF after they'd shot Mike. He came out with his hands up and they told him to get down on the ground and they were handcuffing him. And he said he heard 2 more shots ring out down in the creek. They didn't bring Mike's body out for quite a while. They claimed that they were scared we'd shoot him if we saw them retrieving the body. The thing is, you couldn't see that property from inside the building that we were in. You couldn't even see the top of the barn that the agents had been in all day. So for them to go even further down the hill into the creek, there was no danger to them from us, taking shots at them. The last one that died on February 28th of our group was J. Dean Wendell. Jadine Wendell was from Hawaii. She used to tell us she was the only Hawaiian out of the whole group. Said she was a princess. She was 34 years old. She had 4 children.
Clyde, excuse me for interrupting. Is there anyone here who can make that sound system work?
This is not a microphone.
Huh?
This is not a
He
microphone.
doesn't have a microphone.
Don't have one?
No, you want to sit up
Well,
here
next
first?
year, folks.
Want them set over here?
But they want to hear you, Clyde.
The what? The microphone we had last year, we couldn't find.
We can hear what not to have that, but it's fine.
All right, let's
Then
continue.
we have it. And I apologize.
So, Jadine was found laying on her bunk bed, shot to death, right after she'd been combing her children's hair and handing them off to someone else, I guess, to take them out of the room so they weren't in any danger. There were 4 other people that died on February 28th. They were agents. We have no knowledge of who killed the agents. They won't admit shooting their own. And, you know, but we remember them, even though they were not part of our group. First one is Conway LeBlue, age 30. Second one was Todd McKeon, age 28. Third one is Robert Williams, age 26. The fourth one was Steve Willis, age 32. We try to go through this list alphabetical. I think that's the way it's set up on this thing. Kathy Andrade, this 24-year-old girl from California, but her lineage or her background was from Argentina. Kathy had a little girl by the name of Chanel. Chanel was one. Both Kathy and Chanel died in the fire April 19th. Kathy also had a sister that came sometime after she first came. Her sister came. She was 19 years old. Her name was Jennifer Andrade. Ulrich George Bennett came over from England, age 35. He was instrumental in some of the building projects we were doing. Big, tall guy, compared to all the ones of us that were little. When they arrested Livingston Fagan, they put him on trial along with Paul and myself and several others. Put Livingston Fagan on trial, saying he had shot an agent out the back of the building on the first day of the raid. Their story was that the ones that exited out of the trailer at the front, you know, at the first trailer, went around the back, and as they rounded the back corner, They said there were 3 guys standing in the backyard with masks on, dressed in black, and they jumped to the conclusion that they were their own men until these 3 guys supposedly shot at them. One of the agents was wounded. He didn't get killed, but he was wounded. And these guys went back into the building, I guess. The description was 2 of the guys were white and 1 was a tall black man. Livingston Fagan, probably about my size, skinnier, but, not very tall. I don't see how you could call him a tall black man. But in our trial, like we've mentioned before, it was not about seeking justice for what went on at Mount Carmel. It was not about fulfilling their job of serving these warrants. It was not about arresting David. It was about vengeance, blaming somebody to make up for the ones they couldn't blame any longer because they weren't around. So Livingston ended up getting a 40-year sentence for shooting an ATF agent that he didn't shoot. He wasn't even out in the backyard. And all through our trial we saw this substituting people for the ones they really wanted, or the ones they thought were the ringleaders, or we'll just take anybody. The ones we got our hands on will do, Next one is Susan Benter. She's also from England. She's age 31. Most of these black people from England were originally from Jamaica. Why they'd want to move from Jamaica to England, I don't know. That'd be total culture shock, kind of like Paul moving from Hawaii to Texas. Next one we have is Mary Jean Borst, age 49, a white American. She came to Mount Carmel with 2 other ladies, Trudy Meyer and Ophelia Santoyo, after hearing David at a camp meeting up in Oregon. David took 3 trips to Israel throughout his ministry. On his last trip, I think it was, he met a young guy by the name of Pablo Cohen. He was also from Argentina originally, but he was living in Israel at the time. And when he met David, I don't know how long their conversation went on, but David found he was interested in music and gave him an electric guitar, bass guitar, and says, next time you see me, you can give it back. Several years went by, and he showed up in 1992 at Mount Carmel. David said, "You still got the guitar?" "Yep." "Did you bring it?" "Yep." He says, "Were you ever tempted to sell it?" "Yep." But he didn't. Abadawalo Davies, or as we called him, Dabo. He was 30. He was from Nigeria. came to us via England or Britain. Sherry Doyle, age 18. She was my youngest daughter. For those that were here last year, my oldest daughter had just died in a car crash. So I don't have any family anymore. You're not as good looking as my daughter.
Believe me, I wouldn't want to try.
Next one is Beverly Elliott. She was the one that was fiance of Winston Blake. She was age 30. She came to me during the siege, several weeks into the siege actually. She says, I want to see Winston. She says, can you take me to see Winston? And I had to tell her that Winston was already buried. I said, you wouldn't want to see him anyway, in the condition he's in. Just try to remember him, how he was the last time you saw him. That was the way my mother used to reason. People would ask her about all the children that died in the fire. My mother says, I choose to remember them as they were when I took care of them. That next one is Doris Fagan. She's British. She was Livingston's mother. She was 60 years old. Yvette Fagan, age 32. She was Livingston's wife. Next one is Lisa Marie Farris. When David used to go shopping or traveling, whatever, he used to talk to his father in heaven. Because he knew he had a mission to fulfill. He had a message to give. And he would say, should I talk to this person, Father? Do you want me to speak to this one? He says, God would say, don't worry, my son, I'll tell you which one to talk to. David would take us, especially when we were out in California, David would take us to restaurants, take us to places where they were playing music, all kinds of places. And his whole purpose was to share what God had given him. So in the case of Lisa Marie Farris, she worked at a music store where David used to go buy guitar supplies or buy guitars or whatever. And he began to talk to her and she showed interest. Store owners or managers don't like you taking up the time of their workers just for a chat. They're paying them to work. So David understood that. And rather than get people into trouble by taking up all their time and chewing their ear, he would buy, and as long as they'd listen, he would continue to buy. Probably things he didn't even need. But it kept the management at bay. Raymond Friesen, age 76, originally from Canada, but he had accepted David's message from California. He and his wife Chili moved from California to Texas, and that's where he listened to David. Sandra Hardiel, British subject, age 27. Like I said, all of these people were, most of these people were from Jamaica or Africa. We don't have a picture of Sandra, but maybe we can have one by next year. We have Zilla Henry, British, Jamaican extraction, age 55. She was the matriarch of the family. She had all her children with her, came over with her. The only one in her family that didn't die was her husband, who didn't come, didn't accept David. Zilla Henry was 55. Diana Henry was 28. Stephen Henry was 26. Paulina Henry, 24. Philip Henry, 22. And Vanessa Henry, 19. Novelette Sinclair Hipsman. I met Novelette the last trip I made to Canada. She came to Toronto from Montreal for some meetings we had up there, and eventually accepted David's message. She was 36. Sherry Jewell, age 43. Sherry Jewell was a school teacher, like her mother. Her daughter Kiri went to live with her father in Michigan in 1992, before the raid. Kiri's still out there. She called me on the phone a couple months back. She's married. Sherry died in the fire on April 19th. David M. Jones.
Excuse me, Clive. You skipped Floyd Hartman. Floyd Hartman.
I don't have the paper on here, sorry. Floyd Houghton. Floyd Houghton was from New Bedford, Massachusetts. He came down 1984, right after we left Mount Carmel. Came down to live with us here in Waco, and brought his whole family. His wife ended up leaving him and taking all the children back to Massachusetts. Floyd died in the fire, age 61. Floyd and Stan were very good friends. David Koresh, age 33. Leader of the Branch Davidians from 1983 really to 93. It says 84, but he started in the fall of 83. Rachel Howe Koresh.
We skipped David Jones.
Somebody's messed up my sheets.
David Jones.
Why don't I just read it off the screen? How's that? David Jones was the oldest son of Barry Jones and Mirabelle. He was the husband of Kathy Jones that you've met. Some of, those of you that have been here before have met Kathy, and Heather is her daughter. Mark was her son, and Kevin was his son. David Jones was the one I mentioned that had a bullet removed late in the siege from his behind. Okay, we're doing David Koresh now? Yeah. David Koresh was a name that he took on after he began his ministry. Originally, he was called Vernon Howell. And this is the guy that the ATF were after. So they said. But they weren't after him, really. They were after publicity. They were after him to make a name for themselves. They were after him to get an increase in their budget, as Paul and David mentioned. It was a big showtime, big promotion stunt. We just happened to be the ones they were going to use to get that raise, that notoriety, that, I'd never heard of the ATF until 1993, you know that? I heard of the Elliot Ness guy from TV, And I thought they went out with prohibition. And they'd been around all these years. And they were about to go out of business again in 1992, 93. So that's why they put on this big show to show that they were still an operating law enforcement agency. They were needed, they were doing a good job, and so forth. I don't know too many people in the United States, whether they are for or against us, have a whole lot of regard for the BATF. They had the reputation of being Wild West cowboys. Shoot first and show your badge later or whatever. Rachel Jones Howell Koresh, age 24. She was the daughter of Barry Jones, Maribel. And she had 3 children to David. The first one was Cyrus Howell. He was 8 years old at the time of the fire. Star Howell, her daughter, was age 6. And Bobby Lane Koresh was age 2. You got a pamphlet on this?
Pardon?
You got Jeff Little next.
Did you?
On the original picture that was on the screen before we started, there was a mistake. We had that mistake last year. Jeff Little had his name on a different picture. The picture that he had his name on was Peter Hipsman, right. There are actually two pictures on the, the big picture with all of the photos. There are two pictures of Jeff, not Jeff, but Peter Hipsman. One has a mustache and one doesn't, so that was where the confusion came in for people doing the work on their names. Nicole Gent Little, Australian. Nicole was the twin sister of Peter that was shot on the water tower on the first day of the raid. She had a son called Dalen Gent. He was 3 years old when he died in the fire. She had a daughter called Pages Gent, who was 1 year old at the time of the fire. And she was pregnant with another baby who was aborted during the fire. Livingston Malcolm from England. As we've mentioned in years past, Livingston was a cousin of Bob Marley, for those of you that are into reggae music and everything. He was 26. Diane Martin, no relation to Sheila. Diane Martin was from Jamaica, from England, age 41. She was one of the first people from England to come over and to stay as long as she could. Quite a number of the people from England would come over and stay for 6 months till their visa ran out, and then they'd go back and work like crazy to get enough money to come back again. When people talk about cults, they think of being under the thumb of somebody that can brainwash you and hypnotize you and control you as long as you're around them. But these people that were coming from foreign countries didn't live under David for 10 years. Like I said, they were so anxious to hear what he was teaching that they would save up their money and they would come all the way over here, try to absorb as much as possible before they had to go back. Douglas Wayne Martin, the husband of Sheila Martin. He was 42 on April 19th. Wayne Joseph Martin, his son, age 20. Anita Marie Martin was age 18. Sheila Renee Martin, age 15. And Lisa Marie Martin, age 13. When David went to England, first of all, Steve Schneider went over there because he studied in England at one time, so he was kind of the guy to open the door, make an introduction. But eventually, there were enough people wanting to hear what David was teaching that he went over there. And what he found were a lot of college students, people that had were taking ministerial courses. Quite a number of the people that came from England were very well educated. John Mark McBean was one of them. He was aged 27 on the day of the fire. His sister Janet McBean was a survivor. Tends to travel back and forth between California and Florida. She doesn't come to the memorials too often, but we're still on good terms with her. Bernadette Monbelly. She was a British young lady, age 31. She was friends with the McBean's family. Rosemary Morrison. Rosemary Morrison was 29. She's the mother of Melissa, who was age 6. Of all the people from England, if I'm not mistaken, these are the only two, Rosemary and Melissa, who you'll find in the cemetery downtown. All the rest of them, eventually their bodies were released to their families and sent back to England. Nobody in England claimed Rosemary or Melissa, which is kind of weird. Their sister was a policewoman. You'd think they'd have some money or at least some interest in getting the bodies back. They're down in the Pauper Cemetery downtown. Sonia Murray, British citizen, age 29. Teresa Nebrega, age 48. Her daughter was sent out during the siege and went back to England, but the mother died in the fire. She's Portuguese descent. Her husband has stayed in contact with me for the last 26 years or so. He gets very emotional when he calls on the phone because he can't understand why nobody's doing anything about getting justice. But hopefully in the near future there will be justice, but I leave it up to God. And maybe by the time it's actually meted out, most of the ones involved will be gone. James Riddle. Jimmy Riddle was probably my best friend at the time. He's the one that was in the cafeteria area of the chapel. They said a ferret round was fired in and hit him in, he had a mask on, hit him in the face and knocked him down. Shortly after that, he goes out the back, makes it as far as the back end of the gym before being shot and run over with a tank and pushed back into the fire. Juliet Santoyo. She was the daughter of Ophelia. Some of you have met Ophelia. Spanish American. I went down to where Ophelia was supposed to be staying downtown just the other day, Thursday, I think it was. No, Wednesday. I went down there and they told me that Ophelia's out in California now. Under what circumstances, I don't know. They gave me a phone number and I tried calling, couldn't make contact. Juliet's children were at Mount Carmel. Audrey is the oldest of the girls. She was 13. Abigail Martinez was 11. Joseph Martinez was 8. Then the two younger ones was Isaiah Barrios, had a different father, and Crystal Barrios. Isaiah was 4, and Crystal was only 3. Rebecca Sapea. Rebecca was from New Zealand, originally from Samoa. But all those Samoans apparently like to go to New Zealand because all the ones I've ever met have been Samoans rather than Maoris, you know. Rebecca came over at one time with 2 sisters. 2 of them were here last year. Toya and what was the other sister's name? Grace. They are now back in New Zealand, but Rebecca didn't make it. She was 24 years old. Steve Snyder, well educated, taught comparative religions in Honolulu. He was age 43. Some people said he was David's right-hand man or lieutenant. His wife, Judith Snyder, was age 41. They both were originally from Wisconsin, but joined us from Hawaii. And then there was a cutie called Mina Schneider. She was 2 years old. That was Judy's daughter. One of the few white people that joined us from England was Clifford Sellers. Very talented guy. He was an artist. When he was in California, he spent a lot of time painting guitars, painting signs for various stores in and around LA. I asked the press in England one time, I wrote to the press, I said, how come the British didn't get upset after all of their people that were killed here at Mount Carmel, British citizens? And one of the reporters wrote back to me and says, he put my question to quite a lot of people in the government, people in law enforcement, whatever. He said, and the attitude was, they're not really British subjects, they're immigrants, they're Jamaicans, they're Nigerians, not really British subjects. Well, Cliff Sellers was white, but like the rest of them, he was a foreigner. He was born in Hong Kong. His father was in the military. So they were all shuffled off of no importance in England. Scott Kohiro Sonobe, 35. He was American, but he was Japanese descent. His father got mad at me when Scott and I went over to Hawaii together, worked over there for 6 months. His father came to visit Scott one time, but he wouldn't come in the house. So I went down to the parking lot, talked to him a little bit, shook his hand through the car window, and I turned around and come back out. When Scott came back up, he said his father was mad at me. I said, oh? Yeah, he doesn't like you, he says. He thinks you're Hitler. I said, what gave him that idea? Oh, he just thinks you got me captive. You tell me what to do. Some months later, I think it was the beginning of '92, Scott's father came over to Texas with a totally different attitude. Brought gifts for David. Told David that he thanked him. He said, my son was a no-good bum, couldn't hold a job, disrespectful at home. He says, and you've changed it. Scott's wife, Floresita, was a Filipino. She was the mother of Crystal and Angelica, 2 little girls who came out during the siege. Scott pinned a note on one of them anyway. Told their names, their ages, and who his father was. Please send my kids to their grandfather. When we finally got to meet the Sonobe girls a few years back, they told how when they got back to Hawaii, their grandfather went to court to block Floresita's family in the Philippines from being able to have anything to do with them. Couldn't visit, couldn't, have them go down to the Philippines to visit them. So the court gave him custody of his grandchildren. He no sooner got custody than he turned around and put them up for adoption. He says, we're too old. Grandparents are too old to take care of them. But he'd already blocked the other family from having anything. So the 2 girls left Hawaii. The people that adopted them were a good family, nice family, I guess. But at some point there was a falling out. By the time we met them, they weren't getting along with their new family very well at all. And so I've been up, visited them a couple of times. They came down here to a memorial. Gregory Summers, are we up to that yet? Gregory Summers was from New York via Hawaii. Gregory Summers worked with Judy Schneider in some office there. And through him, he and his roommate, Peter Hipsman, joined along with Judy and Steve Schneider. Greg and Peter were a comedy team. Had a pretty good routine that they used to put on. Aisha Gaiaphas Summers, age 17. She was from Australia, but they were Hungarian immigrants to Australia. Startle Summers was 1 year old. That was her daughter. And like Nicole Jen, Aisha was pregnant on the day of the fire and also aborted a baby. Lorraine Sylvia, age 40. Nobody called her Lorraine, they called her Larry, which confused everybody because people just hearing about her thought she was a guy. She was from England originally. She came over here to New Bedford, Massachusetts, and was the wife of Stan Sylvia. She had a 12-year-old daughter by the name of Rachel and a 1-year-old daughter by the name of Hollywood. Both died along with their mother in the fire. Their brother, Joshua, was released during the siege and went back to live with his father in Massachusetts. Michelle Jones Thibodeau, age 18. There were 3 girls age 18 at the time of the fire. My daughter, Michelle, and
Anita. My
Anita.
daughter Anita.
Anita, yes. Michelle had a daughter called Serenity C. She was 4 years old. She also had twins, which were 22 months old at the time of their death. Names were Chicker and Little One. Margarita Vega. Age 47. Margarita was from China. She'd been married prior to marrying Neil Vega and had a daughter by a German guy. But they got divorced and Neil became her husband. Neil was from New Zealand, but he was an American citizen because he was born over here when his parents were visiting. Neil was basically from Samoa, but they lived in New Zealand, even though they were born in America. Gets complicated sometimes. Last but not least, Mark Wendell, age 40. He was the one married to the princess from Hawaii. Their children, there were 4 Wendy children that were sent back to Washington State to be with, I think it was his sister or one of the family. And haven't had much contact with him since. I was telling Kathy Wessinger the other day, as time goes by and people die off, it's kind of depressing. You kind of think, well, one day we're going to come to the end of the survivors. It's bad enough losing all those ones in the shootout and the fire, but all the survivors are dying off one by one. So I made up my mind to try to contact as many as possible this year. And I'm not so discouraged anymore because there's still a lot of them out there.
And how many are in jail?
How many are in jail? Not as a result of this, anyway.
Aren't they still there?
Pardon?
I don't know.
All of the original prisoners have been let out quite a while ago. Judge Walter Smith chose to turn a minor charge into a 40-year sentence. We had to go to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals twice complaining about it. But the lawyers, our lawyers, the defense lawyers, went about it, in my opinion, the wrong way. Instead of appealing their sentence, I should say their verdict, what they did was they appealed the sentence. They said, Judge, it's too much for the little they did, or the fact that they didn't do anything. It's too heavy a punishment. And the Fifth Circuit, on the second visit, the Fifth Circuit agreed. They said, the sentencing is excessive. They need to be resentenced. And then very tongue-in-cheek, sent him back to the same judge to be resentenced, who gave him the 40 years again. So then we had to approach the Supreme Court, I think twice, before the Supreme Court brought all of the 40-year charges down to 15. On good behavior, you get out a little early. So they're all out now because it's been 26 years since the trial. Okay. We're going to break for a short while you can get refreshments in the kitchen. You got them all laid out, Ron?
Yep.
Did you cook all those turkeys? I'm not getting any answers.
said yes.
We'll have a short break, and then anybody that wants to do interviews, anybody that wants to ask questions,